Hey everyone, and welcome back to Book Summary Podcast. If you're new around here, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help us out. Today we're taking a deep dive into a book that's had like a huge impact on people, First Things First, by Stephen Covey.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a classic for a good reason. You know, it's not just about getting things done, it's about making sure we're doing the right things.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt that feeling of being busy but not productive? Running around like crazy, but not really getting anywhere.
Well, Covey's got some wisdom for us.
Right. And to help unpack all of that, I'm here.
I'm so glad you are. So, one of the first things Covey talks about that really hit me is this whole tyranny of the urgent idea.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think he meant by that? How does it show up in our lives?
Well, it's that feeling that we're constantly pulled in a million different directions by things that just feel so urgent.
Right.
But then when you take a step back, you realize they might not actually be important in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Totally. Think about it. How often do you find yourself saying yes to requests that are urgent for someone else, but not really a priority for you?
Mm-hmm.
Or, maybe you spend hours every day answering emails and putting out fires, but never seem to have time for things that actually matter to you.
Oh my gosh, the emails. Tell me about it.
Like spending time with family or working on that passion project you've been putting off.
It's so true. I feel like I could spend my entire day just trying to get through my inbox.
Yeah.
But you're right. It often feels like I'm reacting to everyone else's priorities instead of being proactive about my own.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how do we escape this urgency trap? Covey doesn't just leave us with the problem, does he?
No, not at all. He offers a really powerful framework for shifting our focus from urgency to importance. And it all starts with understanding the difference between leadership and management.
Now, this is where things get interesting because I always think of those terms like in a corporate setting, like managers and CEOs.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
But Covey's saying it applies to all of us, right?
Yeah, exactly. He says that real effectiveness isn't just about getting things done right. That's the management side. It's about making sure you're doing the right things in the first place,
Okay.
which is the leadership part. And that's about taking the time to define your values, your goals, your true north, as he calls it.
I like that. True north.
And then using that as a guide for your decisions, even when everything feels urgent around you.
So it's like if I'm not clear on what my true north is,
Mm-hmm.
my own priorities and values,
Right.
it's so easy to get swept away by whatever feels the loudest in the moment.
Absolutely. And that's where a lot of us get stuck. We're so busy reacting to the urgent that we don't take the time to proactively define what's actually important.
Okay, so then how do we actually do that? How do we figure out our true north? And how do we start making choices that really reflect it? I feel like a lot of people get lost here. Where do you even begin?
Well, Covey has some really practical tools, and if you like what you're hearing, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of our deep dive where we'll break it all down. One of his most famous tools is the time management matrix.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Have you?
Yes, that 4-quadrant thing, right? I've seen it around, but I've never really dug into it.
Yeah, well, it's a great visual way to understand where we're spending our time and why.
Okay, tell me more.
So picture a square divided into 4 parts. Quadrant O is for those tasks that are both urgent and important. Think crises, deadlines, really pressing problems.
Got it. So that's where all the fire drills are happening.
Exactly. Now, Quadrant 2, this is where Covey wants us to focus most of our energy.
Yeah.
This is for stuff that is important, but not urgent.
Hmm.
Things like planning, prevention, relationship building, personal development.
So quadrant 2 is like the sweet spot, right? The things that are important but don't always feel urgent, but are the things that really make a difference in our lives.
Yeah, you got it. And this is where a lot of us fall short, right? We get so caught up in that quadrant urgency that we forget about the important but not urgent activities.
It's true. Just hearing you describe this, I can already see where I'm spending too much time in quadrant C and not enough in quadrant 2.
It's a common struggle for sure. The tricky
Yeah.
part is that those quadrant I activities often feel so important because they're urgent.
Yeah, for sure.
But if we're not careful, we can spend our whole lives putting out fires and never actually make progress on things that really matter.
So true.
So we've got quadrant I and 2, but what about the other 2?
Yeah, what about those?
Well, quadrant 3 is for tasks that are urgent but not important. Think about interruptions, unnecessary meetings, things that take up your time but don't actually help you reach your goals or live your values.
Oh, so a lot of those emails and distractions probably end up there.
A lot of times, yeah. And then there's quadrant 4, and this is for activities that are neither urgent nor important.
Oh.
This is like the time-wasting zone. Things like mindlessly scrolling through social media, binge-watching shows when you have other things you should be doing, or getting sucked into clickbait online.
It's so easy to fall into that quadrant 4 trap, right?
Oh.
Sometimes it just feels good to zone out, but in the end, it doesn't make for fulfilling life.
Right. And the problem is these activities can be so tempting, so easily accessible that they can steal our time and energy away from the things that really matter.
This is making me think about my own schedule and how I could be spending my time better.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the biggest things you've learned from Covey that you've actually applied in your own life?
Well, for me, one of the most impactful things was realizing that I have way more control over my schedule than I used to think.
Right.
I used to feel like I was at the mercy of everyone else's demands, always reacting to whatever came my way. But Covey's principles have helped me become more proactive to intentionally make time for those quadrant 2 activities that actually match my values and goals.
I love that. It's so empowering to remember that we can choose how we spend our time and energy.
It really is. It's not always easy, but it's so worth it.
For sure.
Like, I used to have a hard time saying no to requests, even when I was already stretched thin.
Oh, yeah.
But, learning about the time management matrix and how important those quadrant 2 activities are, it's given me the courage to set boundaries and protect my time.
That's really inspiring. So many people struggle with that, especially these days where it feels like we're always supposed to be available.
It is a constant challenge. But for me, it comes down to remembering that saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else. And if I'm not careful about how I spend my time, I'll end up saying yes to the urgent but not important stuff and no to the important but not urgent.
Right.
And that's a recipe for burnout.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We've got so much to think about already.
Yeah.
But before we move on to the next part where we'll talk more about how to actually use these principles, I want to ask you about this story Covey shares in the book about an associate who completely rearranged her day to be there for a friend who is in crisis.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a great example of putting importance above urgency. But I can imagine some people might struggle with that choice. Feeling guilty about putting their own needs first.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that kind of internal conflict?
That's a great question. It can be tough when it feels like you might be letting people down by choosing your own needs. But Covey would probably argue that taking care of your well-being actually allows you to show up better for others. If you're running on empty all the time, you won't be able to be there for anyone, including yourself.
Right.
It's like the oxygen mask on an airplane. You have to put yours on first before you can help anyone else.
I like that analogy. It's not about being selfish.
Right.
It's about taking care of yourself so you can be more present and effective in all areas of your life.
Totally. And that reminds me of another idea from the book, the space between stimulus and response.
Yeah, tell me about that.
We'll dive into that and how to really start living those quadrant 2 activities in part 2. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're enjoying our conversation so far.
We'll be back in a flash.
We will! Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about prioritizing those quadrant 2 activities, the important but not urgent things that often get lost in the shuffle.
Right, and that space between stimulus and response, learning how to make more conscious choices, even when things get tough. I'm excited to dig deeper into that because I think that's key to moving from reacting all the time to being more proactive.
Yeah.
But first, I want to circle back to something you mentioned about Covey providing practical tools for actually figuring out our true north and making those quadrant 2 choices.
Right.
You mentioned the time management matrix, but what other tools does he offer?
Well, he's got a whole system for putting these principles into practice, and it goes beyond just time management, It's about managing your whole life, making sure your actions match your values and goals.
Yeah, I like that.
One of the key things he talks about is identifying your key roles in life.
Okay, roles. So is he talking about the different hats we wear? Like parent, spouse, employee, friend, all that?
Exactly. It's about recognizing all the different areas where you want to make a real impact.
Okay.
Covey says that a lot of the pain and frustration we feel in life comes from succeeding in one role at the expense of another.
Ooh, that's so true. I've definitely been there.
Yeah, it happens.
Putting in long hours at work and achieving success there, but then neglecting my relationships or even my own well-being.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, especially in a culture that values achievement and busyness so much.
Yeah, for sure.
But Covey reminds us that real fulfillment comes from aligning all areas of our lives.
So how do these roles fit into like the bigger picture of putting first things first, how do they help us make those quadrant 2 choices?
Well, once you figured out your key roles, the next step is to set goals within each of those roles that align with your overall mission, your true north. And here's the important part. Covey emphasizes setting quadrant 2 goals within each role.
So it's not just about having goals for different areas of our lives, but about making sure those goals actually line up with the idea of putting first things first.
That's it. Instead of focusing on what's just urgent in each role, you're intentionally making space for things that are important but not necessarily urgent.
Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Sure. Let's say one of your key roles is being a parent.
Okay.
A quadrant I goal might be something like, help my kid finish their science project that's due tomorrow.
Yeah. Important, but also super urgent.
Right. But a quadrant 2 goal within that same role could be have a weekly family game night to connect with each other.
Okay.
It's still important, but it's not driven by urgency.
Right. It's about being proactive and investing in the relationship.
Exactly. And I think you can see how shifting to those quadrant 2 goals can make a huge difference over time.
I can, but I imagine it's still hard to actually find time for those things when all the urgent stuff keeps coming up.
It definitely takes effort, but Covey has some good tips for scheduling your week in a way that actually supports those quadrant 2 goals.
Like what?
Well, one thing he suggests is to literally block out time in your schedule for your most important goals and treat them like real appointments.
So like actually put it in my calendar, like I would a doctor's appointment or a work meeting.
That's right. Because if it's not scheduled, it's probably going to get pushed aside by those urgent demands.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you have a goal that's more about just being present, like improving your relationship with your daughter, he suggests writing her name at the top of your list and looking for opportunities to connect with her throughout the week.
Got it.
It's about having that intention in mind and being ready to act.
I like that. It's so easy to get lost in all the tasks and to-do lists and forget about the bigger picture, the relationships and values that actually matter.
It is. And that's where the power of having a personal mission statement comes in.
Yeah.
Covey talks a lot about how important it is to define your mission, your true north, as a way to guide your decisions.
Yeah, that sounds good. But creating a mission statement always felt a little intimidating to me, like it had to be this grand, profound document.
I understand that. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's really just about clarifying what your core values are, what matters most to you, and using that as a guide for your choices.
So if I wanted to start working on my mission statement today, where would I even begin?
Great question. One of the most powerful questions Covey suggests is, what is your unique contribution?
Okay.
So think about what you bring to the world, your strengths, your passions, your values, what kind of impact you want to make. Another good question is, what are your deepest values? What principles guide your choices? What kind of person do you want to be?
Those are great starting points.
Yeah.
I can see how those questions can help you get to the heart of what's important.
Right. And one of the things I really appreciate about Covey is that he doesn't just give you these big concepts. He provides actionable steps.
Like that, yeah.
He talks about this process of quadrant 2 organizing. Have you heard of that?
I have, but tell me more.
Well, this is where you put all those principles into practice, week by week. It's all about dedicating time each week to planning and organizing your life around your most important goals. Those quadrant 2 activities.
So it's like a weekly check-in with yourself, making sure you're staying aligned with your values and making progress towards your goals.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about moving from reacting to being proactive, taking control of your schedule instead of letting it control you.
It sounds so simple, but I bet it's really powerful.
It is. And you know, what's really inspiring about this whole system is that it's not about reaching some perfect state of balance or productivity.
Right.
It's about making conscious choices step by step and adjusting course as you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that putting first things first is a continuous process, not just a destination. There are always going to be challenges, distractions, things that throw us off track.
That's life.
But the important thing is to keep coming back to our true north, those principles that guide us towards a life of purpose and fulfillment.
That's beautifully said.
And that brings us back to the space between stimulus and response.
Right.
Can you explain that concept a little more and how it can help us navigate those challenges?
Of course. It's such a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Covey is basically saying that between every stimulus, every event or situation that happens,
Okay.
and our response to it, there's a space.
A space.
And that space is where our power to choose lies.
Okay.
And we don't have to just react based on our emotions or habits, you know?
Yeah.
We can actually pause, connect with our principles, and decide how we want to respond.
I can think of so many times when I've reacted impulsively out of stress or frustration and then regretted it later.
We've all done that. And Covey reminds us that we always have a choice.
Right.
Even in tough situations, we can choose to respond in a way that lines up with our values and goals.
So how do we actually cultivate that space? Is it something we can get better at with practice?
Absolutely. One of the key practices Covey recommends is self-awareness.
Okay.
It's about becoming more aware of your thoughts, feelings, and reactions. You know, when we're more aware of what's going on inside us, we're less likely to be controlled by our emotions.
Makes sense.
He also talks about connecting with your conscience, that inner voice that guides us towards what's right.
Yeah.
It's about pausing before reacting, taking a breath and asking, what's the best way to respond here? What response matches my values and goals?
I like that. It's about shifting from reacting to being proactive, taking control of our choices.
Exactly. And, you know, for our listeners out there, if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more insightful content just like this.
We'll be right back for the final part of our deep dive into First Things First. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Stephen Covey's First Things First. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
From the tyranny of the urgent to the power of Quadrant 2 living. But there's one more crucial piece we need to talk about, the upward spiral of growth and renewal.
Yeah, this is where it all comes together.
Okay.
We've talked about aligning our lives with our mission, escaping that urgency trap, and making those Quadrant 2 choices. But Covey isn't saying we just reach this level of effectiveness and then stop, you know?
Right.
It's about constantly getting better, always becoming better versions of ourselves.
That really resonates with me. It's not about just reaching a goal and then relaxing.
Right.
It's about embracing that journey of growth, always learning and becoming more aligned with our potential.
Exactly. It's about realizing that putting first things first is a continuous process, you know?
Yeah.
A commitment to constantly learning, evaluating, and refining our approach.
I like that.
And it's not just about work either. It's about growing in all areas of life. Physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual.
So it's like we're only sharpening the saw, to use one of Covey's analogies.
I love that analogy.
We can keep working with the dull blade,
Right.
but eventually we're going to get burnt out and get way less done. It's so much better to take the time to sharpen that saw, to invest in activities that renew us in all areas of life.
You got it. And those sharpening the saw activities, they're often those Quadrant 2 activities, you know. They're important, but they don't always feel super urgent. But they're crucial for sustainable growth and well-being.
So what does sharpening the saw look like in real life? What are some of those Quadrant 2 renewal activities we can do?
Well, for the physical dimension, it's about taking care of your body.
Okay.
Things like exercise, healthy eating, getting enough sleep, that basic stuff.
It's funny how we all know that,
Yeah.
but we still let it slide when we're busy.
It's so easy. We tell ourselves we don't have the time. But really, we're only hurting ourselves in the long run.
That's true.
It's about prioritizing those activities, actually putting them in our schedules, just like we would a work meeting.
Okay, I get it.
And for the mental dimension, sharpening the saw could be about expanding your knowledge, reading, learning new skills, having good conversations.
You know, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know.
Right.
And that's so exciting. It keeps me engaged with the world.
It's the best way to stay mentally sharp. And then for this social and emotional side,
Okay.
sharpening the saw might involve spending time with loved ones, connecting with your community, maybe even volunteering for something you care about.
Yeah, those are the things that bring so much meaning to life.
They really do.
But they can get pushed aside when we're stressed and overwhelmed.
It's true, so we have to remind ourselves to be intentional about those connections.
So true. And then we have the spiritual dimension.
Yeah, this one's often overlooked.
Yeah, but it's so important.
It is.
It's about connecting with something bigger than yourself, whether that's nature, meditation, faith, or something else entirely.
Yeah, and it's so important for our sense of purpose and well-being.
It gives us that grounding and perspective.
Exactly. It's about connecting with those values and your deepest sense of self.
As we're talking about this, I'm realizing this upward spiral isn't just about individual growth, you know? It's also about contributing to something bigger.
Right.
When we invest in our own renewal, we can better show up for others and make a positive difference in the world.
That's such a beautiful point. It's like Covey's saying that by taking care of ourselves, by putting first things first in our own lives,
Yeah,
we're actually creating a positive ripple effect that goes outwards,
I love that.
making the world a better place.
It's so inspiring. It brings us back to that idea of defining our true north, our mission,
Yeah.
and using that to guide our choices. It's about aligning our lives with our deepest values and trying to make a difference.
And, it's not about being perfect or always effective.
Right.
It's about embracing the journey, constantly learning and growing, becoming more aligned with who we really are.
Yeah, it's about those small choices we make day by day
Small things add up.
that create the life we want.
Absolutely.
This has been such an amazing deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us.
It's been my pleasure. I hope this has inspired everyone listening to think about their own true north
Yeah.
and start making choices that align with what really matters.
And for everyone listening, if you're feeling inspired to put first things first, we encourage you to check out First Things First and really dig into Covey's work.
It's a powerful book.
It can truly change your life. And don't forget, putting first things first is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
There will be challenges along the way, but the key is to keep coming back to your values, your true north, and trust the process.
So well said.
Keep sharpening that saw. Keep making those quadrant 2 choices, and keep becoming the best versions of yourselves.
That's the goal.
And until next time, keep putting first things first.